The sound that woke him wasn't a crash. It wasn't an alarm. It was the sound of something small, something fragile, hitting the floor at 9 o'clock on a Tuesday night in one of the wealthiest houses in New York City. And in the silence that followed, everything changed. Lily Carter was 10 years old, and she knew hunger the way most kids know the alphabet, by heart, without thinking. She had mapped every shadow in this kitchen over weeks of careful, terrified study. She knew that the freezer hummed a little louder after 8 p.m. She knew that the scent of whatever the chef had prepared for Mr. Harrington's dinner, tonight something warm, something cheesy, still hung in the cold air long after the plates were cleared. And she knew that if she was very, very still, the heavy footsteps of Mrs. Garvey, the head housekeeper, would fade down the marble corridor by 9:03. She pressed herself flat against the pantry door and counted. Her lips moved without sound. 1, 2, 3. Lily was small for her age, the kind of small that comes not from genetics, but from months of not quite enough. Her hair was the pale color of corn silk, and her pink sneakers had 2 perfect holes worn through the toes. She held her breath. She counted to 60, and then, like a ghost, she moved. Her bare feet made no sound on the polished stone. She slipped past the 6-burner stove, past the massive butcher block island, and made her way to the steel discard cart parked beside the service entrance. This was her target. This was always her target. Mrs. Garvey had a rule. Every scrap of food left over from Mr. Harrington's solitary dinners, every crust, every half-finished bowl from the staff's lunch, it all went into the compost bin at precisely 9:15 p.m. No exceptions, no waste, no sentiment. But the kitchen staff, led by the warm, round-shouldered cook named Bertha, had their own quiet rebellion. They would leave the cart sitting for exactly 1 hour after meals, just in case, they said, in case Mr. Harrington came down for a late snack. He never did. They knew he never did, but the cart sat there all the same, loose foil covering whatever kindness they'd managed to leave behind. Lily knew their kindness. She counted on it. Tonight, she found a small bowl of macaroni and cheese, barely touched, stone cold, and beside it 2 bread rolls hard as river rock. Her eyes filled. She loved macaroni and cheese more than almost anything in the world. She grabbed the bowl. She brought it close. She closed her eyes and was about to take the first bite when the light clicked on. The bowl hit the floor. The crack of porcelain on stone rang through the kitchen like a gunshot. And there, standing in the doorway in a dark blue robe, was Mr. James Harrington, 68 years old, silver-haired, eyes that looked like they hadn't fully slept in a decade. The man who owned the house, the man who owned the company, the man her mother had told her in the most serious voice she ever used, must never, ever be disturbed. James Harrington had lived in this house for 40 years. It had never quite felt like a home, not since Eleanor passed 8 years ago. Now it was a museum of his own life, silent, impeccably maintained, and utterly, profoundly hollow. He suffered from insomnia. He had come downstairs tonight for the first time in years to do something simple, to make himself a cup of warm milk. He'd passed the dark ballroom, the formal dining room, table set for 12 as always, never used. He'd walked through the house like a ghost passing through its own haunted corridors. He had expected darkness in the kitchen. He'd found a child. "You." His voice came out rough, scraped raw from disuse. "What are you doing?" Lily couldn't speak. Her mind was a fire drill of panic. Run, hide, say sorry, don't cry. Mama will be fired. We'll lose the apartment, the medicine, the red letters. She did the only thing she could. She dropped to her knees and began scooping cold macaroni off the floor with her bare hands. "I'm sorry," the words tore out of her throat. "I'll clean it. I'll clean all of it right now. Please don't tell Mrs. Garvey. Please, sir, please." James Harrington stood very still. He watched the small girl shake. He watched her red, smeared hands working frantically at the mess. He saw her clothes, clean but threadbare. He saw the holes in her sneakers. He saw her back heaving with silent sobs. He was not angry. He was confused in the way a man is confused when the world suddenly reveals itself to be much larger and more broken than he realized. "Stop," he said, softer this time. Lily froze, cold pasta in both hands. "Who are you?" he asked. "Lily," she whispered, looking up. Her face was blotched with tears in a small smear of cheese sauce. "Lily Carter, sir." Carter. He searched his memory. Ellen Carter's daughter. Ellen, the quiet maid, the one with the sad eyes who polished the silver in the library, the one Mrs. Garvey called the most diligent member of the household staff.
He had never known she had a child. He walked to the industrial sink, pulled a clean cloth from a hook, wetted it, and brought it back. Then, his old knees popping on the cold floor, he knelt beside her. Right there in the cold, in his silk robe, in his 68-year-old body, James Harrington got on his knees and began cleaning up her mess. "We'll do it together," he said. "Go on, get the pieces." It was as Lily reached for a shard of the bowl that her sleeve pulled back. James saw her wrist, thin as a sparrow's wing, and in her other hand, clenched tight, was something dark and small. "What is that?" he asked. She pulled her hand back. "Nothing, sir, just my lucky charm." "May I see it?" A long pause, then slowly her fingers opened. It was a pin, old bronze, worn at the edges, an eagle, wings spread wide, a military service pin, the kind given to families of decorated soldiers. James Harrington recognized the design immediately. His own grandfather had kept one in a cedar box. "Where did you get this?" "It was my great-uncle's," Lily whispered. "My mom's uncle. He was a soldier." His name was Michael Briggs, a paratrooper with the 101st Airborne Division. He jumped into Normandy in June of 1944, and near a small French village, when his squad was pinned down and outnumbered, Michael Briggs did what some men do, the impossible, selfless, terrible thing. He ran into the open. He drew enemy fire. He kept them looking at him, kept them from seeing his men slip away through the trees. He saved every single one of them. He did not come home. They sent the pin to his mother. She gave it to her niece, who gave it to her daughter, who pressed it into a 10-year-old girl's hand in a Toronto apartment and said, "This is who we are, Lily. We are not people who run. We are people who help. Hold it when you're scared." James Harrington stood up slowly, turning the pin over in his palm. He looked at the small, fierce, starving girl. He had built an empire on calculation, on profit and loss, on cold, clean numbers. This was not a number. This was a family. "Come with me," he said. He led her to the small wooden table in the corner where the staff ate their lunches, and he went to the walk-in refrigerator. He stood there for a long moment, scanning shelves loaded with cheeses, meats, complicated French preparations he'd never once asked for. Then he found what he was looking for, a large ceramic dish from his own dinner, chef's macaroni, 3 cheeses, still warm. He had never in his life used the microwave. He studied the buttons for a full 30 seconds. He figured it out. He placed the steaming bowl in front of Lily and said simply, "Eat." She stared at it. She looked up at him, eyes wide with a disbelief that broke something open in his chest. "Eat," he said again, not unkindly. "It's not a question." She picked up the spoon. She took one bite, and then hunger took over, and the politeness she'd been raised with barely kept pace with it. She ate the entire bowl in under 3 minutes. then the bread roll, crumbs falling into her lap. When she looked up, her face was flushed and her eyes were wet. "Thank you," she whispered. "You're welcome," said James Harrington, and he sat down across from her. "Now, you're going to tell me everything." What followed was a night that neither of them would ever quite be able to explain to anyone who hadn't lived it. Lily told him about the fire in their old apartment in Queens, how her mother Ellen had gotten everyone on the floor out, then gone back in for old Mrs. Gable's cat, how the smoke had done something to her lungs that couldn't be undone, about the pink pills and the blue puffer, about the specialist who said the word fibrosis in the same calm voice you'd use to order coffee, about the treatment that could work, the one that cost more than their car, more than their apartment, about the red letters from the hospital that arrived every week like small, paper-thin catastrophes, about the oatmeal dinners, and the hot dog Lily told her mother she didn't want so Ellen could have the whole thing, and the growling stomach she could hear through the wall at night when her mother thought she was asleep.
James Harrington, who had negotiated mergers worth billions of dollars, who had faced down hostile boardrooms and Senate committees, who had buried the love of his life 8 years ago, sat across from a 10-year-old girl and felt the particular, devastating shame of a man who had been asleep. He picked up the phone on the kitchen wall and called his lawyer. At midnight, Mrs. Garvey was waiting for them on the second-floor landing. She stood in the hallway like a column of ice, pale, rigid, eyes cutting straight to Ellen with the practiced contempt of a woman who has decided, long ago, exactly where other people belong. James Harrington didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He simply stood taller and spoke quietly about a paratrooper named Michael Briggs who jumped into Normandy, about heroism and legacy and what exactly it said about a household that would turn away the family of such a man. Mrs. Garvey's face went from red to white to chalk. She had never lost an argument in 20 years of managing staff. She lost this one in 60 seconds. The blue room had a garden view, a crystal lamp, a bed that Lily said was like sleeping on a cloud. Ellen sat on the edge of it in her uniform, unable to bring herself to believe she was allowed to lie down, and watched her daughter sleep, really sleep, deeply and peacefully for the first time in months. Down the hall, James Harrington sat in his study with a glass of water and spoke quietly to the framed photograph of Eleanor on his desk. "You would have liked them," he said to the empty room. "They have spirit, something this house has been missing for a very long time." Then he picked up his phone and called his head of security. What George, his head of security, uncovered in the following hours was the kind of thing that makes a man's knuckles go white. Mrs. Garvey had been running a quiet, meticulous fraud for years. Faked vendor invoices, a shell company called Prestige Home Solutions, padded overtime for part-time staff too frightened to question their own timesheets, tens of thousands of dollars a month skimmed cleanly from a household run by a man too deep in grief to notice. She had targeted vulnerable staff deliberately. Ellen Carter, no husband, a sick child, no margin for complaint, had been a prime mark. The overtime she never received, the hours quietly stolen, the relentless, grinding pressure of a woman who ruled with the certainty that she would never be questioned. James Harrington sat with the folder open on his desk and felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Not sadness, not grief, something colder and cleaner. Resolve. Mrs. Garvey entered his study believing she still had cards to play. She was wrong. She left it 20 minutes later, signed confession in hand, escorted by George. She did not collect her things. She did not make a phone call. She did, however, at James Harrington's quiet insistence, write a full written apology to Ellen Carter and every member of the household staff. George watched her write every word. The house was finally, truly silent. 1 month later, the house breathed differently. The drapes were pulled back to let in the winter light. There were flowers in the vases. The staff, all given raises, all given back the overtime that had been quietly stolen from them, moved through the halls with a looseness, a warmth that hadn't been there before. Ellen Carter, her lungs finally receiving the treatment Dr. Evans had described, her face beginning to fill in at the edges, walked the house with a clipboard. She was the new head of household. James had been direct about it. "I don't need a jailer, Ellen. I need someone who knows what kindness is. The accountants will teach you the books. You'll teach this house how to be a home again." She had been terrified. She agreed. On a Thursday afternoon, Ellen found James on the back terrace with his newspaper and his coffee. Lily was sitting cross-legged on the stone ground, tongue pressed to her upper lip in fierce concentration, polishing the pin with the corner of her sleeve. Ellen told him the chef wanted to know if he and Lily would be joining for dinner. "We would be delighted," he said. Lily held the pin up. It caught the thin winter light and threw it back, bright as a new coin. "Look," she said, "it's all shiny, like it's brand new." James took it from her. He turned it over in his palm. The eagle, wings spread, the scratched letters around the edge, the weight of it, so small, but so heavy with everything it meant. He thought about a man named Michael Briggs running into open fire so his friends could live. He thought about a woman running into a burning building for a neighbor's cat. He thought about a little girl, thin and hungry, kneeling on a cold kitchen floor, protecting her mother's dignity with everything she had. "Your great-uncle," James said, his voice catching slightly on the word, "would be so proud of you, Lily." Lily beamed. "Mama says I'm brave like him." "You are," James said, handing the pin back. He looked at Ellen. He looked at the house behind them, warm with light, warm with voices, warm with the particular and irreplaceable sound of people who belong somewhere. "You both are," he said quietly. "You saved us." Lily ran, her laughter loud and unself-conscious and absolutely unafraid. It rang through the garden and off the old stone walls and up into the cold New York sky like something that had been caged and finally, at last, let go. For the first time in 8 years, it was the loudest thing in the garden. And for the first time in a very long time, it felt exactly right.
For more videos, please subscribe, like, and comment.